I want to tell you a bit of a personal story today as we start out. When my wife and I, if you're not familiar with our family, we have 4 kids. All of them are 8 years old and under. And we've been married about 10 years. And so the majority of our married life has been welcoming child after child into our life and going through the process of pregnancy and then the recovery from that with a 1-year-old infant, and then like looping back into that same routine and cycle. And what we saw was after our first child was born, after our daughter was born, who's now 8, right after she was born, my wife began to experience some symptoms, kind of light symptoms of depression, just get discouraged really easily and not be able to kind of get over that hurdle. She felt like she was really depleted emotionally. Sometimes she felt really discouraged. Sometimes she felt really alone. And it was a point in time in her life when she didn't have a lot of close personal friends as well. And so that probably compounded that. And then when our first daughter was about 1 year and 3 months old, we found out that we were expecting our second daughter. And so we kind of looped back into that cycle. And pregnancies are really difficult for my wife. She gets very nauseous, very sick for about 6 out of the 9 months of that. And so we looped into that. And I, as dad, went into survival mode again, trying to help a 1-year-old, make it through life. And Christine was trying to be there as much as she could for our daughter while she was going through this pregnancy. And then after the baby was born, our second daughter, the depression, it returned. And it never really quite left, but this time it was much worse. And it was, again, more of those feelings that she couldn't shake of loneliness and discouragement. Even the positive things that we looked at in life, like they didn't really help pick her up out of that. And then with our next child came along even sooner. And so when our second daughter was really young, less than 1 year old, 9 months old, we found out we were expecting our third child. And so looped right back into that same cycle again. And after this, our son was born, our third child, the depression was sort of at an all-time, it was terrible. It was a really bad state. And she, again, was feeling really discouraged and depleted and alone most days. And I felt neglected and exhausted because I was putting out a lot with our other young kids, and sometimes, honestly, kind of resentful. And I knew that she couldn't control what she was experiencing, like it was affecting her, but it was affecting me as well. And so we were not in a good headspace, and we didn't really know how to shake that. And we thought at that point in our lives that either we couldn't share that with people in our lives, or we didn't have the people to listen to us, or maybe as good Christians, we shouldn't talk about those things. We shouldn't talk about our struggles. And we kind of wanted to keep them in the shadows because we thought that it would either be perceived by people as a weakness in our faith. And I was working as a youth pastor at a different church at the time. And so, being involved in ministry, you don't want to be perceived as having a weak faith, Or with some people, maybe like we had, a sin problem because we were so discouraged. Because after all, shouldn't we be joyful in the Lord all the time? And yet we were dealing, with this kind of deeper, darker thing. And we thought, if only our faith was stronger, we'd have joy and we wouldn't feel this way. If we could just correct the way that we were thinking or something that we were doing, our experiences would just go away. These feelings would disappear. But they didn't, and they wouldn't, no matter what we tried. And maybe you've been at a point in your life where you felt similarly. And if you have, I think today's passage is going to be something that's a relief to you and maybe a light of hope as well. It's not just okay to shed light on who we are and how we're truly feeling and how we're doing, but it's actually something that when we do, we bring light into our situation. It actually enables God's glory to come to the surface in our life and us to shine even brighter. And so we're looking at a message again today called Wearing Light or Wear Light from Ephesians 5:8-14. And we'll look at some different aspects of what that means for us to be light and to wear light as believers. And maybe you'll see a little bit different take on it than what you've heard on some occasions. This is how the passage starts. It's in verse 8 of Ephesians 5. It says, "For you were once darkness." Isn't that great? This is our state. For a period of ongoing time, we were darkness. I was reading an article recently about some MIT engineers, and in 2019, so a couple years ago, they created the blackest of black materials that exists on the face of the planet. Somebody had created a color that was supposedly the blackest black before that, but they outdid it by 10 times. What they were doing is they were trying to take some foil and process it in a certain way so that they could coat it with carbon nanofibers for some kind of space applications and things of that nature. But in the process of that, they had to take this foil and they had to process it in chlorine. And then they put it in an oven, and that's how they attached the carbon nanofibers. I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand all the in-depth, applications of that and how that went about. But because of the process of submerging that material in chlorine and then putting it in an oven, it turned it a very black color. And then they found that when they attached the carbon nanofibers to it, which had sort of ridges, think of like a mountain range that has topography to it, it became even blacker. And the MIT scientists were so caught off guard by how black this thing was that they decided to do a test on it. So they shot light at it from all these different angles, and they tried to figure out how much light is returned. What they found out is that material absorbed 99.995% of all visible light from any angle it was shown at. So it was dark, it was black. And that's kind of our state. Before we came to faith in Christ, we dealt with a lot of darkness. And maybe we tried to project light in different ways. And maybe because, again, we're created in God's image, it wasn't like everything in our life was terrible or, no goodness came out at all. But in many ways, we weren't emanating the light, specifically the light that God defines as that. And we'll get into that in the next couple of phrases. What is light as far as God is concerned? But how God defines light, that wasn't really present in our lives. But then there's a stark contrast. The rest of verse 8, it says, "But now you're light in the Lord." So we went from something that was just sucking up darkness, it wasn't projecting light back as God defines light, to something now that's just emanating light. So we're a flashlight, we're a light source now. In the Lord, we're capable of actually giving off light. And so because of that, we want to figure out what is light, because that's part of this. And so the next phrase is walk as children of light. So people who are characterized as followers of the light or associated with light. And the contrasting statement to that earlier in the chapter was there are some people that walk as children of disobedience. And so it's kind of in contrast to that. Once we walked in darkness, we weren't really concerned with God and what he wanted for our lives, his definition of what was right and what was good. We're kind of, going based on our own compass throughout life. We weren't concerned with obeying God. And now all of a sudden, we're children of light. So we are concerned with what God sees as light and truth and that kind of compass for direction in our life. It says in the next phrase, "For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth." And I want to take a moment here and talk about a couple of variations in some different Bible texts and manuscripts. And this gets a little bit technical, but I feel like it's important here because it really relates to the topic and how we understand this. Some of the earliest manuscripts that we've discovered of the New Testament we found in a discovery called the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of those came out in the late 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Some of them are still being uncovered today in caves just near the Dead Sea in Israel in a community that was called Qumran. And so we have some manuscripts that are much older than some of the previous ones that we'd relied on for Bible translation. And in most cases, there's virtually no difference between those texts and those passages. But in this particular verse is one of the areas where the older manuscripts have a different word. Instead of saying fruit of the Spirit, which is common to us, we use the phrase fruit of the Spirit more commonly, it actually says fruit of light in those earlier manuscripts. And I think that might be more true to our topic here as well. So I'm going to go with that reading of this. For the fruit of the light, and then it lists three different categories, is in all goodness and righteousness and in truth. So I would say this, light is characterized by three things preeminently. One is goodness, one is truth, and one is righteousness, okay? And so we want to talk about what is that? What is goodness? Because that's kind of a general term. In the Bible specifically, goodness talks about a Jesus follower's kindness. So part of our light component, part of what shines out from us is when our life looks like the kind of kindness that Jesus showed to people. And Romans does a great job of fleshing that out. Toward the end of Romans, that term, essentially there's a verse that says, everything that I've told you in the previous few chapters, that's examples of this goodness that we're focused on. And some of those things that Paul talks about elsewhere in the book of Romans, putting up with each other's weaknesses, okay? We all have them. We're all close to people who have them. And so a part of that, that's goodness, that's kindness when you deal with other people's weaknesses because they deal with yours. Being patient and comforting people, that's a part of goodness or kindness. And these are very practical things. Encouraging and loving our neighbors, that's a very tangible example of goodness, biblically speaking. Accepting other people without trying to reform their personal opinions and convictions, that's a part of goodness. Placing ourselves under our governing authorities, having a humble opinion of ourselves, using our spiritual gifts, overcoming evil with good instead of just trumping evil with more evil, and meeting other people's needs and showing hospitality. all those from Romans are different examples of what goodness is. And so it's our life being light in the sense that we're showing the kind of kindness that Jesus would show to the people in our lives. Okay. Then there's the next aspect. And in the verse, it says righteousness and truth. I want to flip it and talk about truth first. What does truth describe in the Bible? Truth is looking at a follower of Jesus as reality. That's really what truth is. I think in most verses in the Bible, you could substitute the word reality for truth, and it would be, a great equal translation. And so as the Bible talks about truth, it's talking about, one, the whole reality of what's happened or is happening in our lives or our minds. That's part of truth. What's really going on inside your head? What's really going on in your life that you really don't want to talk about? Because again, it's one of those things like what we dealt with through our pregnancies of, honestly, if you want to know right now, we're really depressed. Honestly, if you want to know, I feel like throwing in the towel on my marriage because I'm always putting out. My wife's depressed all the time. So there you go. That's where we are. That's reality, but we don't want to talk about that. But that's part of truth, and that's part of light. The reality of who God is and how God desires to be followed is part of truth. The reality, apart from our personal favoritism or preference, so looking at something objectively instead of like favoring people, the reality that sets us free is sometimes truth in the Bible. The reality of God's expectations and our accountability to that. All those things are aspects of light. And we really can't walk as people who are children of light if we're detached from truth, if we're detached from reality, and we keep other people in our lives detached from our reality. That's not walking in light. It's not walking in truth. And then the third aspect of walking in light is righteousness. And righteousness talks about our adequacy as a follower of Christ. It's not so much the kind things that we do, and it's not even our grasp of reality and truth and how we bring that into our conversations and let people into our lives. It's more of how God sees us, and he sees us as adequate because of our faith in Jesus Christ. God takes his righteousness and he transfers it onto us when we put our faith in Christ and his sacrifice on the cross for our sins. And so we are truly adequate. And so a part of being light is that assurance that we're now adequate in God's eyes. We don't have to worry about, feeling guilty constantly because we're letting God down and we don't know what's going to happen to us. I mean, are we good with God? Do we have an eternity with him? Are we going to be punished away from him? We just don't know, And we finally are in this place where we're settled, we're secure, we feel adequate because Christ's righteousness is on us. And that's a third aspect of light. So righteousness, truth, and goodness are all those different elements of how light should shine out from us. Verse 10, it says, finding out what's acceptable to the Lord. So walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And then it says, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. And I want to camp out on that word finding out, because it's really a curious word in the New Testament. We don't catch the full brunt of it in our English translations. The word finding out it's a Greek word dokimazo. Dokimazo probably doesn't really ring any bells for you either. But there's a scholar, his name's Donald Gray Barnhouse, and he wrote a little bit of an excerpt about this word and the history behind of it in a book called Romans, God's Glory. And this is what he says. In the ancient world, there was no banking system as we have today, and no paper money. All money was made from metal, heated until liquid, poured into molds, and allowed to cool. When the coins were cooled, it was necessary to smooth off the uneven edges. The coins were comparatively soft. And so you have a smooth-edged coin. But you know what's so tempting about that? If you just shave off a little more of that precious metal that makes up that coin, the edge is still smooth. And if you're careful enough and you just take off a little bit, nobody ever knows the difference. Most people don't know the difference. And so that was the temptation. If you look at many coins today, if you pull out a quarter in the United States, especially if you get one that's a pure metal like a gold eagle or something like that, they all have ridges. The reason why our country put that into our currency with the mint was to keep people from shaving off the edges like they would in the Greek and the Roman world. And so there were certain places you could go to exchange money. We have currency exchanges today. You go to banks or exchange centers or places, or people in other countries. And people aren't always honest with you. And people weren't always honest back in this time either. And so some people would say, yeah, we'll take your currency. We know that you shaved some off the edges, but it's okay. We're good. And then they would pass that on as people traded them for money. But since it was made out of the metal, and the metal was where its value came from, they were sort of getting ripped off every single time. But there were certain types of money exchangers who would scrutinize it, and if they could tell that anyone had shaved it off because they could weigh it, right? If anybody had shaved off anything from the edges, further than what they had done when they made the coin, they would refuse to take it. And those people were called dokimos. And that's where this word dokimazo comes from. So it's talking about scrutinizing something with the same attention to detail that these money traders would give. And so the idea, it's a word picture. And the idea is it's up to us as believers to circulate what's genuine in God's eyes. And what's genuine here, it's called acceptable to the Lord. And maybe a better way to translate that would be well-pleasing, something that pleases God. And so what pleases God is what's genuine, right? Just like the genuine coin would please the dokimos, right? They'd exchange your money for it. They'd take it in return. And so that's the idea behind it. If we're genuine, we're well-pleasing. But in our day, oftentimes it's tempting to look at ourselves as followers of Christ and say, if we look good on the outside, then we're pleasing to God. But he doesn't want our outward appearances. He wants a genuine heart, one that's willing to actually be truthful with people and show people how we really are, one that's willing to shed light on something instead of just keeping it a secret, which again is what our temptation, that's what the norm is, for us to feel like, I don't know how people will perceive this. I need to cover it up. I need to keep it a secret. My kids love to keep secrets from me at times, and we have this rule in our house, like we don't have secrets, right? We're trying to work that into our kids' thought process, but it doesn't always work. And occasionally we'll notice that the door is shut to a certain kid's bedroom. And we know when the door is shut, probably something's happening behind there that they don't want us to know about. And especially if we have friends over at our house and the door is shut, we know something's brewing. And we've had a few times when the door has not only been shut, it's been locked. And so when the door is shut and locked, and that happened, again the other day, we realize our kids are up to something. And normally with our children, half the time it involves water. It's like making some brew of paper and toys and elements of the outdoors and bugs and things inside a locked room that involves water, and oftentimes the water spills all over the carpet and everything else. So most of the time, well, at some points in time at least, it involves water. And then there are other times when it involves creativity. Coloring on walls, putting stickers on walls, cutting dolls' hair, cutting kids' hair, something of that nature. So that's what happens, right? But there's a reason. They want to keep things a secret because I think in their hearts, maybe they feel a little guilty, or maybe they feel a little concerned about how mom or dad or someone will react if they find out. So it's just easier to keep it in a locked room or a room with the door shut. And yet we laugh at that, and we operate the same way as adults many times. Or as teenagers, there's certain things we keep locked inside of ourselves, and we don't want anyone to know because we're afraid of what people would think of us. And that's kind of how things segue on in verses 11, 12, and 13. It says in verse 11, "Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them." And so I think because Paul's giving the Ephesians that instruction, don't have fellowship with unfruitful works of darkness, probably the tendency is for them to have fellowship. They, and probably we as well, become partners with darkness. And the way that we partner with darkness, it sounds so terrible and devious, right? But really the simple way that we do it is just by concealing things. Just like my kids do. They do it in a closed room. And so we partner up with darkness when we conceal things instead of revealing things to other people in our lives. And it says here that's unfruitful, which means it's not to our advantage. And it's so hard for me to get this through my own mind because I think, if I just preserve who other people think I am, they don't really know how I react sometimes, or the words that I think in my head, or how frustrated I get at my kids, or what I say to my wife. We're good. If people just don't know that. But that's concealing, and that's me partnering with darkness instead of actually revealing. And I think it's to my advantage because, I look better to people. But it's really not. It's really not genuine. It's not light. It's not beneficial. And God knows as well. So what kind of things do we, conceal? Why do we conceal things? The next phrase, I feel like it almost shoots in an opposite direction. So I want to talk about this for a moment. Because on the one hand, verse 11, it says, don't partner up with these works of darkness. Don't conceal things, reveal things, expose things, open up about things. But then the next verse, it talks about shame. It says, for it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. And I've heard that verse taken by itself a lot, where believers will say, these are things we shouldn't talk about. It's shameful to talk about them, so just repress them and keep them inside. But I don't feel like that's really honest with where the text is headed, because in the previous verse, it told us we need to get these things out in the light, in the open. And in the very next verse, it tells us the same thing. As light, we should be in the business of exposing things and revealing things. I think verse 12 is just kind of a tie-in to some of the previous things where, we don't want certain things to characterize our conversation all the time, to dominate our conversation. And maybe there are certain things in this world that happen that are dark, and we have to be careful about, dwelling on things, or as we talked about last week, gossiping about other people because how their lives are characterized by certain things that we consider dark or unloving or not light. So we don't want to do that, but on the same hand, we have to be careful, I think, with shame as well. Because the tendency can be to say, let shame motivate you and drive you. I would say the primary cause of concealing, oftentimes, it's either a personal feeling of shame or a fear of being ashamed. When I look at my life, the things that motivate me to conceal things and keep them locked inside, it's either I feel like if I share them with people who might help me, who might love me, who might be encouraging to me, one, I'll either feel ashamed of what I've done or they'll shame me. And those types of things really take me over. And so it's almost the opposite of what verse 12 is pointing out. Like sometimes we just deal with shame, period, when it comes to the idea of being light. And maybe some of us have had bad experiences in the past where people have reacted in wrong ways and they have, tried to shame us in a sense. But we shouldn't really, according to the whole passage, stuff things deeper. I want to stop here as well for a moment and just talk about what kinds of things might cause us to experience shame. And maybe the world around us, people are dealing with shame all the time as well. And maybe we have to be careful how much we talk about in that sense, but in another sense, we need to bring it up. We need to talk about things. What might cause us to feel shame or to fear being shamed? Maybe it's an addiction in our life. Maybe it's alcoholism or other substance abuses or pornography, those types of things. And we think, well, if I talk about that, people are just going to judge me, or I'll feel ashamed of what I've done. Maybe it's marriage challenges. Marriage is no cakewalk. If you are not married, look out if you ever jump into a marriage relationship, because it's so difficult. You have two people who think very differently, who have very different personalities, and you throw them in a house together every single day, day in and day out, and you keep pumping more and more stressful things into the environment. You see what happens over time, right? And only by God's grace do you make it through, or by some people just their dogged endurance, and their tenacity, you make it through. But you face communication issues, you deal with different philosophies, personalities, different parenting approaches, at least we have, finances, and sometimes it's a lack of time together, work demands, and all those things. And we struggle, quite honestly. But we don't talk about that because, again, we fear shame or being shamed. Maybe it's a past decision that you now regret, and it's been regrettable maybe for weeks or months or years or decades. Maybe it was a divorce in the past or a past abortion experience or a bridge that you burned with some friend that you had. Maybe it's excessive debt or deep depression, those kinds of things you don't want to talk about, or thoughts of suicide or ways that you cope that you know are unhealthy. Maybe it's self-harm or neglecting yourself. Maybe there's different kinds of mental health concerns that you deal with, anxiety disorder or mood disorders or impulse control disorders, personality disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, post-traumatic stress. You went through a stressful thing in the past and it really has affected every day of your life ever since. Maybe you've been a victim of abuse in the past. And I've talked with many people even throughout this congregation over the years who that's their story as well. I mean, if you think you're alone in these things, you're not. But I think it's tragic that so many people are alone because they're keeping this in a dark place and they're never really getting it out to talk about. And see, some people have, tragic ends because of that. They never bring it out, and so people's lives even end sometimes because they're never able to bring things into the light. Verse 13, it says, "But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light." Made manifest is kind of like made known by the light. For whatever makes manifest or makes known is light. And so it's almost this thing that light is driven. It's compelled to make hidden things known. And how ironic it is that we're children of light now. We should be compelled to make these hidden things known. But sometimes we just go right back into the dark shadows because, when we go in the opposite direction. And I would say light should feel compelled to make hidden things known, especially its own hidden things, because sometimes we focus too much on other people's hidden things. We want to talk about what other people are dealing with or bring things up to other people. And maybe there's a place for that. I think there certainly is. But I think probably the place we start is home with our own lives. And we start by bringing the things in our lives into the light, by exposing that. Because again, that's kind of light's purpose. And now, we're not just supposed to be like light, we are light, according to this passage. And so that becomes our purpose, to bring these things out. And that's a part of this masterpiece in the making process. That's a part of this transformation. Because we really can't start to transform areas of our life that we're not even willing to bring out of the shadows. And we're going to find out in the final verse here, there's actually some huge benefits. And this can be a big witness as well, being able to get these things out. The last thing I want to mention on this point is light, it has to exercise extreme caution. And I would say this is particularly when light is making things known in other people's lives. And the beginning part of verse 14, it says, therefore he, God says, awake you who sleep. I want to point out a couple things here. I think predominantly it's God who convinces people, especially people who have been living or maybe in a dark place. And so while there are opportunities for us to point things out to people, I think God is the one who brings the conviction. And so you trying to play the Holy Spirit or me trying to play the Holy Spirit and just drive home to someone that they need to make a change in this area, or that this is an area that they're not, willing to bring out into the light or something of that nature, it's not going to have the same effect as if you point things out, or like Jesus, he asked good questions. Almost every time when Jesus brings stuff out like this, when he causes people to step out into the light, he doesn't say, hey, did you know what you're doing in your life is wrong? I'm God's son. Let me tell you about it. He asks them a question, and then when they answer their own question, they realize, oh yeah, there's a few things I need to address. One of the examples is the rich young ruler. Instead of saying, you know what, the one law that you're not following is coveting, he asked him some questions. Would you follow me? Would you give up everything? And the guy was like, no, I don't want to give that up for you. And he realizes, oh, that's the one piece of the law that I haven't been keeping. I've been coveting. Or there's a woman at the well, and her need is for this living water. And she's got a lot of different things going on in her life. She's been through 5 marriages. She's on her 6th relationship. And Jesus just asked a question. He says, can you bring your husband? And that starts the ball rolling. But he doesn't want to address that issue. He wants to bring her to the point where she realizes she needs living water and she needs to worship God in spirit and truth. So he's always drawing her around to the truth of who God is. So it's really interesting how Jesus, who God himself, God in the flesh, how he handles these things. But I think we're so careless sometimes, especially if we have to bring something up that we feel someone else needs to hear. But Jesus is so careful, and he uses questions a lot of times so people will realize where they're at on their own. I think that's a good tactic to use, or good. Tactic is maybe sneaky, but it's a good way to approach people with care. Also, awakening. It talks about awakening here. Awake you who sleep. Awakening is kind of a process. I don't know. Well, there are some times when my alarm rings or my phone rings and I am just out of a dead sleep like that. But oftentimes, especially my teenage years, waking up was a process. It would take me 15, 20 minutes to get out of bed in high school some mornings. My parents were really patient with me. Instead of just yanking me out of bed, Jason, it's time to get up. Jason, you have school. Jason, you have to eat breakfast. Jason, you're late. Get out of bed now. And it was a process. And awakening is a process for us and people too. And so when we're coming into the light, or we're bringing people into the light, I think we have to recognize it's not an instantaneous thing. Many times it's a process. So just a couple of comments on that. But it doesn't just end there. The verse continues. It says, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. So here's the whole quote. Awake you who sleep. This is God's quote. And I would say this is a rough quote from 2 scriptures in the Old Testament. I want to take us there as the final thing this morning. So, therefore he, God says, awake you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. So kind of 3 components. So awake you who are sleeping, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. That's what Paul finishes with. And I think if we look at those passages in the Old Testament, it gives us just a couple of other encouragements to leave this topic on this morning. The first is that coming back to life, it's actually supposed to be bliss It's supposed to be a joyful experience. And in this phrase, coming back to life or rising from the dead, it's equated with coming out of the darkness, right? Bringing things up that you've been suppressing because you're afraid of the shame that you feel, the shame that other people will put on you. So bringing that to light, it actually is bliss. It actually brings you into a place of joy. And I want to read the two verses where these quotes come from. Again, it's Isaiah chapter 26, verse 19, and Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 3. But Isaiah 26:19, it pertains to that phrase, arise from the dead. It says, your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. And I think that's unique because it's talking about the resurrection in the future and how when people are raised back to life, the first reaction is going to be, yes, we're back. And that's kind of the idea here. It's like, yes, I'm back. I had so much weighing on me that I didn't want to get out, but I finally was able to bring it into the light, and it's like a weight lifted off of me, and I can finally experience joy again. That's one of the elements of a rise from the dead, based on the context where that quote's pulled from in the Old Testament in Isaiah 26. And then it talks about Christ giving you light, and that's where the arise from your sleep and receiving light, that comes from Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 3. And this is what that passage says. It says, arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. And again, this is talking again about time when it says in the next phrase, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear upon you. So it's talking about Jesus' second return, second coming to the world. And so the world's shrouded in darkness, in trials, in judgment. The people are under deep, deep darkness. And then Jesus is the light. He reappears. But Paul's taking that and applying it to people's lives who have been hiding in shadows and dark places. And he's saying kind of like Jesus is going to just smack the earth with his glory and his brilliance when he returns to a dark world at his second coming. It's kind of like that happens to us when we crawl out of the shadows and we allow ourselves to express who we really are, share the truth of who we are with other people, and allow them to lift us up and encourage us. It's that same effect like God's glory appears on you. Because again, he can start to work with us then. And he can realize, oh, hey, Jason and Christine, they're in a place of deep depression, and they can start to get answers. And for us, the way that God's splendor kind of worked into our situation, God's beauty sort of showed up in our life, was that one of the first things we did was we talked to Christine's doctor. And we actually realized from that this is, it's a common thing. Postpartum depression is a really common thing that people experience. But our doctor was really knowledgeable in that area. And he said, you know what happened because you guys had so many kids in such a short period of time is that your body never really recovered. It was drained of different vitamins and minerals and things that it really needed, and you were never able to get to that place where your body was replenished before you jumped into this chaos again and again, and that's why you're where you're at. And he said, I can give you an antidepressant for a short period of time, but he said what's going to help even more are taking A, B, and C supplements. And he gave us a list of things, and it was like night and day, just getting to a place where Christine's body had some of the things that she needed. Made an instantaneous change. And then also, when we had our fourth child, instead of having a 9-month gap between pregnancies, we had more like a 2.5 or 3 year gap. And so she had time to kind of fully replenish her body. And so the last pregnancy was night and day, and the last delivery and the last infant over the last 13 months has been night and day. And sometimes she would still see herself slipping into some of those same thought processes, but never for more than one day at a time, never for 2 days in a row, and she could recognize it immediately, And so sometimes the help that we need to get out of our dark place, sometimes it's just to confide in a friend, to open up and talk about how we're feeling. Sometimes it's to maybe talk to a doctor and say, is there something physiologically, biologically that's happening here? Because oftentimes it is. It's crazy how interconnected our bodies are, our minds, everything we experience. And you even see that throughout Scripture, that our emotions and our feelings, and our physical side of ourselves, they're oftentimes connected. And so they affect each other. So maybe that's the answer. There are times when we need to get some professional counseling help. I'm good friends with a clinical mental health counselor in the area here. He's a believer, but he also And so he has a lot of Bible-based things that he can take clients through, but he also has a lot of clinical psychology that he can use to help people as well. And so there's a lot of different resources that we have. But I think the tendency is to hide, and to be ashamed and not to address things. But when we're able to get help from one of many resources, which are valid, then it brings us out into the light, and God's splendor, his beauty, can be seen in our lives. And one of the last things that verse says, that scripture in Isaiah 60 that Paul is quoting, it says, nations will come to your light, talking about the people who are reflecting Jesus' glory when he returns. Nations will come to your light, you peoples of God, and kings to the brightness of your rising, you peoples of God. And so the implication here is that when our lives come out into the light, we're able to get the support that we need from people in the areas that we need it, and not hide behind who we are and what we fear other people will think of us. At that point, other people see the brightness of our rising out of the darkness. They see the change. And that actually draws people to God. And that's actually splendorous. And so the more that we truly share the reality of our lives with people, and the more we support each other in that, the more people in the world around us who don't know God and don't see him at work in this world will see what he's doing in my life, or in our marriage as a couple, or in your lives, and that'll draw people to himself. And so that's really how we go about being light. Instead of giving you action steps this morning, what I want to do is just kind of give you a word of personal encouragement and say, if there's anything that you ever need to talk about, I'm available for you. Maybe you have friends, maybe you have family members who are there for you that you would confide in first, and that's great. Maybe you have other people in this church that you've grown close to. There are some of you that would much rather approach somebody else out here than someone like me, because maybe we haven't developed that close of a friendship yet. But I want to let you know, if you ever need someone to talk to who's not going to be judgmental, who will treat you with grace, I could tell you story after story about just about any topic you could imagine approaching someone about. I've had conversations with people about. Many people throughout our church family, even over the last 5 years. And so I guarantee you, you're probably not going to throw me for a loop or throw up something new that we've never talked about before. And I see my own flaws because I've been through things myself, and I still go through things myself. And so just know that if you ever need someone to talk to that way. And I also have connections with people who, even around the country, have gone through some of these different things that I personally haven't gone through, like miscarriages, for example. But I know people who have experienced multiple ones of them. And so all these things, there's ways to connect you with other people in this community or beyond it who are believers, who can encourage you in that. So just know that we're here for you, and that many people around you are here for you as well. Let's go ahead and pray today.